it's Miss Sharon from Sugar Plum Studio. Thank you so much for joining me. This week, one of the projects that we had available for sale was a hamburger cake. So if you purchase the hamburger cake, this video is going to show you how to assemble and decorate that. So we have a few things that we need to gather before we get started, in addition to what was in your kit. You're going to need a paper plate or any other kind of plate. It doesn't have to be paper, just as long as it's larger than the chocolate layer of cake that came in your kit, because we're going to need to be able to get to the sides of it. So I find that a paper plate works best, and it's easiest to clean up. So one paper plate. You're going to need a pair of scissors. You're going to need something to spread your icing. Now, I'll be using an offset spatula because that's what we have here at the studio. If you don't own an offset spatula, that's perfectly fine. You can certainly use a butter knife or even the back of a spoon if you need it to. The next thing you're going to need is something to roll out your fondant. Now, I'll be using the fondant rolling pins that we have at the studio. Again, if you don't have one of these, you do have other options. Any standard rolling pin that you have in your kitchen will work just as well. If by chance you don't have a rolling pin in your house, any kind of smooth bottle will work. If you have a hydro flask or a water bottle, this is a can of kitchen pan spray, use nonstick spray. So anything that's hard and smooth like this, you'll be able to use. So you don't necessarily have to have the rolling pin. And the last thing that I need is a wet towel or some paper towels so I can wipe my hands in case they get a little messy. So the very first thing that we're going to do before we get started is make sure that our hands are nice and clean. So I've already washed my hands, so I'm ready to go. Just going to move this aside and make some room. The first thing we're going to do is make the fondant pieces for our cake. So we're going to be making some cheese and some tomatoes with our fondant. So we have our fondant in our kit. You also have a little container of cornstarch. Now, cornstarch is used to help keep the fondant from sticking to our hands. Because the fondant's made from sugar, your hands are warm, so the warmth of your hands is going to warm up the sugar that's in the fondant and sometimes makes it a little sticky. So the cornstarch is going to help us make sure that it doesn't stick. So we don't need a whole lot of cornstarch, just a little bit. So you can go ahead and take the lid off. We're just going to dip our fingers into the cornstarch like this, and we're going to rub it on our hands. Just get a nice light coating of cornstarch all over our hands. It mostly disappears, and that's fine. And then we're going to dip our finger in one more time, and this time we're going to rub it on our work surface. So you can rub it directly on your table or your countertop, wherever you're doing this project. All right, so we're going to open up that bag of fondant, and let's do our cheese first. So we're going to take out that orange fondant. Now, as soon as you take it out, you'll see that maybe some of that red fondant is stuck to it, and that's fine. It happens. I'm just going to pinch those little pieces of red off of my orange like that, and I can throw these back into the bag. And then I'm going to take that orange fondant and I want to squish it up and make sure it's nice and soft. And I'm going to squish that up, make sure it's nice and soft. I'm going to roll it into a ball, place it down on my work surface, and then I'm going to start to roll it. So I want to make sure that I'm rolling in multiple directions. I don't want to just roll up and down, because then what you're going to wind up with is a long skinny rectangle. We want kind of more of a square shape. So it's not going to be a perfect square, and that's fine. We'll be able to use it still. All right, so sometimes your fondant will stick to your rolling pin, whether you have this or a wooden pin or you're using a can. That's totally fine. You can peel it off. You can dab a little bit of cornstarch right on whatever you're using to roll, or put a little more cornstarch on that fondant. So I'm going to roll up and down, and then I'm going to roll side to side. Move your fondant. I like to move my fondant a lot while I'm working with it. That way I know for sure that it's not sticking to the surface. All right, so I want to roll my fondant out until it's nice and thin and about this big. So if you see me holding it in my hand, I have a nice big, circle like this. So what I'm going to do is take my butter knife or my spatula, whatever you're going to use to ice your cake, and I'm going to cut this fondant into 4 squares. Now, if you see on my fondant, the edges aren't exactly squares. It's more like a circle round edge. And that's fine, because the part that we really want to show is the center part of where we cut. So that gives us a nice point. That's going to be the edges of our cheese. All right, so we have that. We're going to set those 4 kind of round triangles that we made. We're going to set those aside. And then we're going to make our tomatoes. So we're also going to make 4 tomatoes. So if you need a little more cornstarch on your hands or on your surface, that's fine, although we're going to mostly be using our hands for this. So we're going to take that red fondant, we're going to squish it up, make sure that it's nice and soft, make sure it's nice and squishy, roll it into a ball. All right, and then I'm going to roll it back and forth in my hands a little bit to make just a chubby worm like that. And I do that because I think it's easier to divide that way, because I want to cut this into 4 pieces. So what I'm going to do is take that knife or that spatula again, I'm going to cut it in half, and then I'm going to cut each of those halves in half. So I wind up with 4 relatively even pieces. So I'm going to take one of those pieces, I'm going to roll it into a ball in my hands, all right? And then I'm going to start to flatten that ball. What I want to do is make a flat circle of fondant like this. Right now, I wouldn't say it looks much like a tomato at this point, but the view that we're going to have of it is mostly on its side, layered in our burger. So from that view, it will look very much like a tomato, even if it doesn't look much like one right now. So I'm just going to continue to make all of those fondant tomatoes one at a time. While we're doing any of our cake decorating projects that we've had over the past few weeks, if at any time you need to stop the video, you can certainly do that. I'm going to leave these up on our Facebook page. I won't be taking them down after the project is done. So even if you didn't purchase the project and you find that you have these materials and you want to give it a try at another time, you absolutely can do that. The videos will stay available on our Facebook page. All right, so I have 2 tomatoes. Here's my 3rd. Now, if your hands start to feel a little bit sticky from that fondant, you can always use a little more cornstarch. I wouldn't suggest using too much, because we don't want the fondant to get dry. We just want to make sure that it doesn't stick to our fingers. So I have my 4 tomatoes just about finished. All right, there's my 4th tomato. So I have my 4 tomatoes and my 4 slices of cheese. So I am finished with my cornstarch, finished with my fondant. I'm just going to give my hands a quick wipe, clean up my work surface, and then I can get started on my cake. So now I'm going to be using a turntable to ice my cake, just because I like to use one. If you don't have one, you certainly don't have to worry about that. You can absolutely decorate this cake without a turntable. We often do that in the studio. I just happen to have one, so I'm going to use it. So I'm going to take the bottom layer of my yellow cake. So in your kit, you have 1 yellow cake and a single layer of chocolate cake. So I need the bottom layer of this cake. So what I'm going to do is separate the top layer from the bottom layer. I'm going to take the bottom layer, take that cake circle that's in the kit, and put that bottom layer right on that cake circle. So if you have any crumbs, you can brush those off. All right, so I'm going to take my icing that was in my kit, give that a nice little stir with my spatula or with my butter knife, whatever I'm using, and I'm going to put the icing on this cake. Now, I like to use the back of my spatula to scoop. That way, it helps you get it out of the container a little more easily. And I always use the bottom of my spatula to spread my icing. Now, I'm going to ice this whole layer with that icing. So this is going to be our bottom bun. So I'm going to spread a thin layer on the top, and then I'm going to ice the sides. And And don't worry if you get some icing on your cake board, we can clean that up when we're all finished. That's always like the last thing that we do when we're decorating a cake, is clean up our cake board, because presentation is very important in cake decorating. You want to make sure that your cake board is nice and clean. All right, so I'm going to run my knife or my spatula around the sides of my cake. Again, you don't have to have a turntable to do this. You can certainly, keep the cake right on the table and still run your spatula over. I want to make sure that I don't have any jagged edges of icing sticking up off the top. I want this to be as smooth as it can be. This is going to be the bottom of our bun, so I'm just going to clean this up just a little bit. All right, so that's my bottom bun. So the whole cake is iced. Then I'm going to take my chocolate cake layer, right? And I'm going to place that right on top of that bun. And I'm going to press that down just a little bit. So this is going to be our burger that's inside the bun. Just going to wipe my hands a bit. All right. So now I'm going to take that green icing bag that was in your kit, and I take my scissors. Now, how you cut the bag is going to make a huge difference on how the icing comes out of the bag. So I want my bag to still have kind of that triangle tip, but obviously if I don't cut the bag, no icing is going to come out. But I want to kind of mimic that point when I cut the tip off. So I'm going to snip in one direction at this angle, and then I'm going to turn my bag and cut it again so that I still have kind of a point, but this time the bag is open and the icing will come out, because that way it'll be a little bit ruffly when it comes out. So now this is going to be my lettuce on my burger. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and, I think I'm going to put my cheese on first. I'm going to put my cheese on first. So let me take my cheese. I'm going to put a squirt of icing right on the edge of my burger. And I'm going to place my cheese on the edge, the round side, so that the cheese kind of melts, like it's melting over the edge of the burger. All right, I'm going to do that in 4 random spots. I just want that pointy edge to be hanging over. Thinking about how I like my burger, and I want my cheese a little bit melty. So putting my cheese on my hot burger will make it nice and melty. Not so much if you put it on cold lettuce. So let's put our cheese on first. All right, so there's my 4 pieces of cheese hanging over the edge of my burger. Now it's time for my lettuce. So, think about a lettuce leaf. It's wavy and leafy, so that's kind of the look that we want. Now, we're only going to see the very edge of it around the cake. So that's the place I want you to concentrate the icing. So what I'm going to do is just squeeze and wave my hand back and forth as I pipe the icing on the edge of the cake. And I want to make sure that I'm piping right over that cheese, the round part of that cheese piece. That'll help anchor it to the cake. So this is what our lettuce should look like once we pipe it around the edge. If you want a little more lettuce hanging out, you can certainly go back and do another layer. See how cutting the edge of this bag like that gives it a kind of ruffly effect, and that's what we want with our lettuce. So I'm going to do a nice ruffly lettuce. All right, and then I'm going to take what's left of the bag and I'm just going to fill in that center part of our burger layer. We don't even have to spread that out. That's just going to make sure that that top layer of cake sticks on to our cake. So now I'm going to set this aside because I'm going to start icing the top bun. Now I like to ice the bun separate from the rest of the cake because you run a great risk of messing up your lettuce and your cheese and everything you've already stacked if you're trying to ice the bun right on top of the cake. So that's what we're going to use that paper plate for. And we're going to ice that separately. So I'll put that bun, I want that nice rounded part sticking up. Usually when we do any kind of cake at the studio, we want the top nice and flat, but I really wanted that round bun shape with this, so I left those tops on. So we're going to ice this just like we did for the bottom. We want to cover the whole thing. And I'm going to use my spatula to get that icing all over the top and down the sides. You may or may not use all of the icing in the container. If you like a thinner layer of icing, that's absolutely fine. If you love icing like I do, you might want to use every bit of it. There's no right or wrong. This is your art. You get to decide what it looks like. I'll always tell you that when we're decorating. All right, so I want to make sure that I'm getting that icing all the way down to the bottom of that layer. And I want to try to make it, as nice and neat as I can before I put it on top of my burger. It doesn't matter so much about the top of the cake being nice and neat, but I want to make sure that my sides are nice and covered, and you'll see why when we go to put that on the cake. And it's okay if it's not perfect. There's no such thing as a perfect cake. And, when it comes down to it, what you're going to do is cut it and eat it anyway. So it certainly does not have to be perfect. All right, so I have the top of my bun covered. Now, the reason that I like to use a paper plate is because I think that it makes it a little bit easier to move this to get it on top of the bun. So I'll show you what I mean in just a moment. So I'm going to move the top of my bun. I'm going to place my cake back here. All right, now I'm going to place my tomatoes on my lettuce. I like to put them kind of in between the cheese pieces. All right, and again, we just want just the edges to be able to stick out between the layers. All right, so I have my tomatoes on. Now I'm going to move my bun. So the reason I like to use a paper plate is because you can bend these edges back and it will help you move the cake layer a little more easily than if you have a solid plate. Because the paper plate kind of softens a little bit as the icing is on it. So, you can use your hands or you can use your spatula to help you do this. Maybe get a grown-up or, someone else in your house to help you move this if you need to. So I'm just going to put it right on my hand. And then I'm going to drop it very carefully right on top of my bun. Now, the great thing about a burger, so think about if you make a cheeseburger at home or you order a cheeseburger in a restaurant, it's a stack of food. So it's never going to be an absolute perfect stack. It may be a little bit, topsy-turvy or off-kilter a little bit, and that's all right. It doesn't have to be perfect. So if your burger isn't perfectly aligned, it's totally fine. It doesn't have to be. You just want to make sure that all of the pieces are on top of each other. So once you set it on top, you can't really move it too much. So be very careful when you place it. And like I said, if it's not perfectly aligned, you kind of just have to be okay with that, because once you start moving it and shifting it, you really run the risk of your burger toppling over or really messing up your cheese or your tomatoes. All right, so now I have my burger stacked. Now, while my icing is still soft and kind of sticky, I want to make sure that it is kind of soft and sticky. I'm going to put my sprinkles on top for my seeds. Now, you don't have to use the sprinkles if you don't like, a seeded bun. That's totally fine, but I'm a big fan of sprinkles, so I'll use them any chance I got. All right, so now we had some supply issues with the color sprinkles that were available in the photo. We had chocolate sprinkles, and we unfortunately weren't able to get those in this week. So we had to substitute other sprinkles, yellow sprinkles, I believe, in the kits. So sorry about that. Sometimes we can't guarantee that we're going to have everything, but they're still sprinkles, so they're going to be delicious. All right, so I have my sprinkles on top, and you don't have to use them if you don't want to. And the last thing that I'm going to do is clean up my cake board. So remember, I said in the beginning, you know, presentation is very important. Even if your cake is not the most perfectly decorated cake, if you serve it on a nice clean cake board, that shows me that you paid attention to the detail and you wanted it to look nice. And you know, you have a really well iced cake on a dirty cake board, that just makes a bad presentation. So you really want to put your best foot forward when you're doing cake decorating. So there's our burger cake. All right, so we have 2 layers of yellow cake, a layer of chocolate cake, we have our buttercream lettuce, our fondant cheese and tomatoes, our sprinkle seeds, and that looks like a pretty good burger to me. So it's going to be a great weekend for barbecue, so go ahead and enjoy that. Make sure you get some time outside. We're still inside, still doing what we have to do, and that's okay. We're, you know, home and safe. That's all that matters. So you take care of yourself. Make sure that you wash your hands. Do something creative and fun every day, and I'll see you soon. Bye.